This week's blog post is the 18th in my series on visiting the Wadsworth Atheneum. This week we're looking at Baroque and Rococo art at the Wadsworth. For previous posts, there's a link in the blog post itself. First up is this portrait by Frans Hals of Joseph Coymans, 1644. Hals, who lived around 1581 to 1666, is renowned for his virtuoso brushwork, which makes even sober merchants like this one seem energetic. The artist painted at least 4 other portraits of members of the Coymans family, including one of my favorites, which is now at the National Gallery in Washington. That's at the upper right. The Coymans were a prominent merchant family in Amsterdam and Haarlem during the period when Holland was the foremost commercial power in Europe. The Dutch Golden Age, which is roughly the 17th century, was spurred by an influx of highly skilled workers who were fleeing religious persecution elsewhere in Europe, by the availability of cheap energy, windmills, by a relatively free political system, there was no absolute ruler, and by the energetic efforts of manufacturers, merchants, and traders such as the Coymans family. The rising wealth of the Coymans and other members of the upper middle class spurred the demand for artworks of high quality. Rembrandt, Vermeer, and Hals were painting portraits and narratives in Holland at this time. So were still-life painters such as Willem Kalf and Willem Kleishede, one of whose gorgeous still lifes we saw in last week's post. That's at the lower right. Next up, Caneletto, the Square of St. Mark's and the Piazzetta, painted around 1731. In the mid-18th century, Caneletto, 1697 to 1768, painted views of Venice as mementos for wealthy travelers. His paintings are filled with sunlight, the sort of weather one always wishes for on a vacation. I've seen Canelettos in the Flagler Museum, the Ringling Museum, and of course the Metropolitan Museum. There are links to all of those in the blog post. Next up is Guardi, View of the Piazzetta, painted around 1770 to 1780. Caneletto and Guardi, 1712 to 1793, were the most popular painters of Venetian scenes in the mid-18th century. In the Wadsworth, this painting by Guardi is hung right next to a Caneletto, so we can see the difference between the two artists. Most notably, Guardi uses looser brush strokes, which gives his work a more spontaneous, but also less exact feel. You can see the same effect in a Guardi painting in the Gardner Museum in Boston, which I've given you a link to. Next up, Bernardo Bellato, View of Pirna in Saxony, 1763. Bellato, 1721 to 1780, worked in Venice with Caneletto, who was his uncle, until 1747, when Bellato moved to the German courts in Munich, Dresden, Vienna, and Warsaw. This view is from a town near Dresden. The buildings are in the German style, but the light, to me, somehow feels Italian. This is porcelain, not marble, but porcelain, glazed, made at the Meissen porcelain factory, based on a model by Johann Joachim Kendler. These busts from the famous Meissen factory prove that porcelain can be used to create monumental objects as well as small decorative ones. They belong to a set of more than 10 busts that had been created by order of the Pope at the Meissen factory in Dresden. Dresden was a Catholic enclave in the mostly Protestant German-speaking countries. And the last one for this week. This is another work based on a design by Johann Joachim Kendler for the Meissen porcelain factory. It's the Judgment of Paris, and it was created around 1762. This group showing Paris's choice of the fairest goddess, which led to the Trojan War, seems to have been the centerpiece of an ensemble with 8 other groups of mythological couples. The complexity of these porcelain pieces and the intricacy of the painted decoration, pretty amazing. I do still find it difficult to look at Meissen porcelain with a fresh eye. Even today, 3 centuries later, there are so many knockoffs of it for sale. What happened to Meissen porcelain is similar to what happened with Claude Lorrain, whom we saw last week, and Maxfield Parrish. Successful artists get copied again and again and again, and their style becomes so ubiquitous that it's difficult to appreciate the originals. Next week we will be looking at some French porcelain, which is quite different from Meissen. DianeDuranteWriter.com has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, architecture, and my other obsessions. To join the free Sunday recommendations email list, visit the URL that's on the screen or email me. And you can say "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on DianeDuranteWriter.com. As always, thanks for listening.